picture paints 1,000 words. Take this one from me. Slideshows of souvenirs in endless memories.
Hi, my name is Peter Stickney. I've been collecting the stories and wisdom of senior citizens for several years. This project has been a passion of mine to document these stories before they are lost forever. These personal histories are about the adventures, challenges, and successes of elders, and I hope you'll learn as much from them as I have and find them intriguing and insightful. Today, you will be hearing the memories of Georgia Hesse, who grew up on her father's huge ranch in Wyoming. She went from riding a horse 3 miles to grade school to working at the San Francisco Chronicle in several different capacities, including movie reviewer. Later, she suggested to Randolph A. Hearst that she become the first travel writer for the San Francisco Chronicle. First, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague Carol Johnson, who interviewed Georgia Hesse. I'll let Carol tell you about herself and how she met Georgia Hesse. Join me on the journey down memory lane. Welcome to Stories from Our Elders.
I knew of Georgia Hesse many years before I actually met her. Like many San Franciscans during the 70s and 80s, there were always 2 columns in the Chronicle I read first: Herb Cain's daily coverage of San Francisco events and local gossip, and then I read Georgia Hesse's travel column. Later, in 1998, I retired after 29 years of teaching English in San Francisco public schools. I was looking forward to traveling, and friends gave me the perfect read for a long plane trip. It was a very funny book titled, "I Should Have Stayed at Home: The Worst Trips of Great Travel Writers." It included Georgia's hilarious description of an exciting but disastrous trip to the North Pole. Several years later, in 2014, I sold my home in Noy Valley and moved to the Carlisle, an assisted living community near Japantown. When I read through the resident list, there was Georgia's name. Obviously, I was destined to meet Georgia Hesse eventually. You were on a ranch, right?
Yes.
But how far from a town of any size?
22 miles
22 miles.
from Buffalo. Buffalo, Wyoming, named after Buffalo, New York.
And did you have neighbors that were sort of nearby, or were you just sort of way out 22 miles from anything?
22 miles at least from anything.
How far was school for you?
Well, it was 3 miles because my father kept his own school and a teacher. And there were 6 of us students in 6 different grades. And I was the youngest. And the others were children of the cowboys who lived on the ranch.
Right.
And I rode horseback to school.
Every day?
Yes.
From what age?
6, and a cowboy to ride with me. We had a pot-bellied stove and one-room schoolhouse. Oh, it was very much fun, and I remember the first day of school, and the last thing my father said to me when I got on the horse was, "Now don't tell anybody that you already know how to read and have for years." It may be that he was tired of my telling his friends that. And I was a Kelly girl.
That's a temp
That's
agency.
a temporary typist.
Yes.
And one day, and that's where I started getting to be a pretty good typist. And then one day I looked down the row of people, and nobody was speaking to anybody, of course, and our hands were all in the same position. And I thought, I am in a machine. I'm not going to be a Kelly girl anymore. We all looked the same. And so I I quit, and then I had to have a job, of course, so I went to the Examiner one day and the Chronicle the next, and the Examiner the next day and the Chronicle the next, until they finally hired me at the Mr. Hearst, Randolph Hearst, who was the publisher.
And what was your job?
It was just to be in the Sunday department and write features. At first, it was amorphous. And so I did that. And then one day, he came to me and said, Grace House has died. Now, Grace House was a columnist. That was her byline name. And she was a columnist about interior decoration and all that sort of feminine business. And he said, would you like to be Grace House? And I thought, you don't know a darn thing about that, because my sister was the expert on all of the feminine housekeeping things, details and choices and colors and all that. And so I said, yes, of course. I wanted a job. And so I took that job. And then after that, he said, would you do this for a few months? And I said, yes, I will. And then he came to me one day and said, we're going to fire the person who has been the editor of, no, he didn't say editor, who lays out the TV log. I had never known what a TV log was. And he said, can you lay out a TV log? And I said, of course. And so I quickly learned how to put the TV log meant that section.
Yes.
I didn't
but
even know it meant a section.
It sounds like a dreadful job.
It sounds terrible.
Yes.
Awful.
And people could get mad at you if you made a mistake,
Oh,
because
yes.
they would want their TV log to be accurate.
That's right. Well, of course, that was good. That was fine. That was good training. So I had worked with a printer because we had hot type then.
What does that mean?
It was metal type, and you printed it out on those little printing machines that had the little pieces of lead.
Oh, right, yes.
You've seen those
Yes,
pieces of
yeah.
lead. And so it was hot type, and so I had learned to read it upside down and backwards so that I wouldn't have to have a whole printed sheet to read the type, which is, of course, upside down and backwards.
Right.
And Pedro helped me. Pedro was Mexican, and he was a happy man, and he liked people. And he liked me because, and I needed him to instruct me with the technology of all this. And he said, I like you. You always dress up for me. Well, I put on lipstick. And you should see how awful most of the females looked when they went down to the print shop. They wore overalls and coveralls, and they would be all spotted with ink and everything. I would make sure that I was dressed and washed my hands and everything, comb my hair for Pedro. And so I taught him about what I was writing about in features, movies, literature, grammar.
And you were then, eventually, you were a movie critic for...
After that, then the movie critic got fired, and they asked me if I'd do movie critic for a year while they found a nationally qualified name critic, which they did. They finally found from the New Yorker a man named Stanley Eichelbaum.
I remember his columns.
Him?
Yeah, I do.
And for a year I was movie critic, and I enjoyed that thoroughly, of course.
Except you told me you saw how many movies in 1 year? It was something like...
More than 500.
Oh. And of the 500, how many were worth seeing?
I finally decided about one a week out of maybe 12 to 14 a week.
And would these be in a private showing room, or would you go to a movie theater?
I preferred to go to the movie theater because I soon discovered that I learned a lot more from the audience and its participation and its laughter and its taking in its breath when it was scared, and I got a lot of data that I thought was public and more beyond me, more for the public to read. And more easily that way than at a private showing,
Right.
where everybody sat there stoically and saw the same movie and thought about what they were going to say. And it didn't have too much to do with the content.
Right.
Sometimes it was each individual, you know.
Yes.
So I learned more that way.
And so when Stanley Eichelbaum was then hired, then what happened to you next?
Next, it became the jet age. And the first jets started to fly from New York to Paris, and from San Francisco to Mexico, and so forth. And so I decided I was going to be the travel editor. And there wasn't a travel editor. There never had been at the old Examiner, even though it was first newspaper. And so I went to Mr. Hearst and suggested that he start a travel section and that I be the editor. And I think he said yes after he looked into it, because he found out I'd lived overseas for a couple of years. And it was easy to find somebody like that. So.
And this is what, about 1970?
58.
58.
1958,
Right.
I became the travel editor. First one they'd ever had.
Right.
Wow, life was different back in the day. Thank you for joining Stories from Our Elders. Join us next time to hear more stories about Georgia's life and her adventures with the San Francisco Chronicle and more.